Need to give Marcin a second here. The setting changed to make everybody have to log in to him. There he is. I knew it was going to get some people this week. I'm always hesitant to switch that setting, but
Hello.
I
Yeah,
can hear you there.
I'm struggling with login today. Not sure why it requires login.
We made a setting change after some stuff happened last week.
Okay. Unfortunately, it crashes my browser every few seconds, I think.
Do you have a Zoom login?
No, I don't.
They are free, and that's probably what's getting you.
Did you have a Zoom bomber?
I don't know if it was a Zoom bomber or someone that was just completely lost. But
So
yeah,
was it anything exciting? No, like no good story.
No, nothing exciting. But then when I went to publish the recordings, we had an 11.5 hour recording from someone that was just sitting at his desk all day with Zoom open.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a waste of cloud space somewhere. It would have been a lot more fun to find like a recording and someone's like dancing, interpretive dancing a meeting.
Got to listen to all the YouTube videos that he was watching that day. And Dirk, if you haven't gotten kicked off already, I'm told Gmail might work as well.
Yeah, I used my company account, so that's fine. I'm not sure if it's visible anywhere. But if for some reason my browser keeps crashing, so I changed one setting, so I turned off videos. That seems to be helping. I don't know. This is the only Zoom call that I have, so it's new for me.
I was really hesitant, but when I was chatting with Amy last week, she was like, yeah, flip it on, see who complains. So you and Marcin get to be the people that complain.
Hooray.
Let's wait maybe 1 minute more for Patrick. If he doesn't join, we can start.
Yeah, Christian also was active on email in the doc this morning, but who knows if he can make it.
Okay, let's start then. Dirk, maybe we can start discussion from image author section number 5, because I saw there was some discussion from Christian and Vanessa about this point.
Yeah, so I think Christian is basically saying, let me try to summarize to show that I understand or don't understand either way. So basically I think Christian is suggesting that there's some attribute that says that the author in the manifest can say like, you must check compatibility for this. And then the underlying tool then goes up and they say, I found this annotation, I have to check the compatibility. I don't think that adds anything. I don't think that the spec should have any kind of opinion or should be allowed to have any kind of opinion about whether it's checked or not. I think that that should only be on the level of the tool. And then very simply, a tool could have a flag that's like check or don't check, leave it at that. But the extra like, oh yeah, you kind of should check. And I don't know. So that's my understanding of it. And I don't think we should have that in the actual spec.
Yeah, I agree with that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Brent.
But I was going to add another agreement onto there, which was mostly anything we add to this should be relatively backward compatible, and nothing that exists out there today is going to have something that knows how to handle any of this, and so it's going to ignore it.
Cool. So I guess we can move.
So
to
as I
another-
commented on it, sorry. So as I commented on that, I think it's not a shall, so it's not a runtime must respect it, but it's just like an indicator, right? So there is actually a compatibility spec, and if you don't find one, then there might be an error, right, in your setup. So log a message or something like that. And I think that's so. I can see the use case of that.
But wouldn't that implicitly be implied in having the reference to it? There should be it. And if it's not there, it's an error.
Well, if the implementation is that I think the proper term is manifest, if I remember correctly, is containing a reference to it, and if there is no reference, then there isn't one. Then yes, but then this use case is fulfilled, right? So I think this was about a discussion where we say the compatibility spec is actually a separate artifact that just happens to be alongside the image, maybe with a special tag or something like that. And in such case, it's interesting or it's useful to have an indication in the manifest. Hey, go look if this other thing is also there, because then you might want to respect it. So basically as a backlink, basically.
I guess I'm not understanding how that adds any benefit to just having the reference to it. And then, the tool finding that, oh, it doesn't exist and it should be there because the reference is there. Like the implication is that the person that is pushing the manifest, I think my understanding is that the person that's pushing the manifest is also probably pushing that artifact, the compatibility artifact. And so if they forgot to add, I don't know, some reference but then they put their annotation like it should be there, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like the correct usage would be to make sure that if you want compatibility to happen, that you add the reference, and then the tool that's using it finds the reference, and then it maybe has a flag that says do or do not check the compatibility, but there's no like third attribute that's like, yeah, I think this should be here, and like just like a heads up, and it adds like an extra level of, it's not even an extra level of detail, it's redundant. It's redundant, it does nothing, and it could be wrong too.
I think we were having the discussion before the holidays, it's been a while, but one of the concerns was people might copy an image. And so you copy an image and you detach all the refers from it. And now you're attempting to run this thing from a different registry that doesn't have any of those refers anymore. And so does the image author get the ability to say, hey, that thing you copied should have had these things with it, and you might have missed those in the copy.
Yeah. Or you just use some tooling that isn't prepared to use or to copy the compatibility spec.
So if you copy the image, you copy the manifest?
And you can mirror an image without mirroring the refers.
Sorry, can you explain what exactly would be copied when you copy the image? So you'd copy it, but you wouldn't get the references to the artifact. I don't mean exactly like the blobs. I mean like in the manifest, you wouldn't have like the pointer that says, here's my other my things that I refer to.
The pointer that says, here's my other things I refer to, is in the refers, not your image manifest. And so the subject value is in your compatibility spec. Your image itself doesn't have the subject. Your image is the subject.
I guess the
mean,
question. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, that's totally fine. That if you have an use case where you have to copy an image and you, for example, forget about artifact or so, it's your fault. We just have to have wording or something like that. Just be careful how you copy and what you copy, and the burden is on you. We don't. I wouldn't introduce a new mechanism of, I don't know, some wordings or some annotations. Rather, I would maybe improve tools to copy the image itself. But I think saying that in the documentation, for me, it's good enough.
That is like almost what I was about to say, that that responsibility would follow with the tool that is doing the copy. And if it's the case that the copy could miss that, then that just means that that tool needs to be updated to make sure that it does some warning to the user or something to ensure that at least they're aware of what they're doing. But I agree. I don't think, anyway, yeah, I agree.
How does the tool know that it should be copying something when it doesn't, when it wasn't updated, right? So I think it doesn't solve it, then the flag doesn't solve it anyway.
Yeah, the question
To be
is
honest
having
with you, I think
there-
it's fine as a transitive measure to just have additional transparency and helpful hints to administrators. So I think this is something that. So I see the value of it, right? To have indication that everything is properly copied or mirrored into your local registries. But it doesn't have to be in the manifest. I mean, any solution for me is fine. But I think since we are adding a new artifact, it would be useful to give people a way to check that or the authors a way to check that everything or declare that everything has to be copied.
For me, this feels like a little bit of like over engineering, or I don't know if that's the right term. I would rather implement something that is simple first, and then have very strong evidence that something like this is needed. And only then to come back and then to talk about strategies for, solving the problem that we have. But I don't currently think that this is a problem that we have. And I don't think that we should be, feature bloat, that's what it's called. I don't think we should be adding it yet from the get-go because it's extra.
I would take the opinion that there is a request by someone that wants it, and so let's leave it as a requirement that someone wants, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every implementation we propose is going to deliver this. That's up to us when we decide how we want to build these implementations and make proposals.
Yeah, I would argue though that the need or the want is coming out of a desire for some specific use case, and we could build something simple and show them how to satisfy that use case without having this extra annotation. And I think that's the best path to take first. Not to say that we never go in this direction, but I think that's the first thing to do.
That's fine, right? So if it's not needed to indicate that there was a compatibility spec and it got lost in transmission or in replication, then that's fine, right? So I think this is for me, it's clear that this will happen, right? So in a practical world where you have users that don't always read documentation from the beginning to the end, this will happen repeatedly.
But I think we can do it, without introducing any annotation. It's just a simple reference API check to see if there is a reference with this artifact type, assuming that registry supports reference API. I just learned recently that Quay doesn't. So, yeah.
Docker Hub doesn't, ECR did, and then now they don't. Maybe they will again in the future. It's a moving target.
Okay, so then this flag is somehow needed, right? So because if you mirror it into Quay, if I understood it correctly, then you wouldn't be able to check via the referrer API, and then you don't.
Oh, and GitLab too. GitLab won't even let you push no matter what. But I do see Till is being very patient with a raised hand there.
Oh, sorry. Kill, go for it. Ah, sound.
There we go. This should help. Hello.
Yep, we hear you.
Now it goes. KDE always setting the sound to minimum. I was wondering if there is actually a good way to prevent this kind of situation from a tool not copying the manifest, because in the same way it would also not copy the notation to not copy if it edits the manifest or makes a new one.
So if it is inside the manifest and you copy the manifest as is, you would have that because that's content addressable. Because refers are externally attachable, if you don't know that you need to run that API call, and that's a new API that we haven't even finished standardizing, tooling that does that copy a day, a lot of it doesn't include that. By default, a bunch of tools out there just don't.
Yeah. So the key is properly copy the manifest and don't make a new one and copy over only what you think you know.
Which should be how most tools do a copy do it. They should be doing a byte for byte copy because it's content addressable. If you do anything that interprets it and then rewrites it, you'll get a different digest and users complain very quickly.
Right, correct.
So the conclusion is we will see.
I would say I realize that there is dispute on it, but I would say that there's at least some people that want it. And we've had a couple of these where not all of us agree, just leave it in. And as people come up with their solutions, we might not solve this in every solution. We might pick a solution that doesn't solve this. And that's up to us to decide later on.
Yeah, and I guess that my follow-up question is like, let's say that you have that, and let's say that you have you have a copied manifest and there's the compatibility spec is missing and there's that annotation and someone wants to use the image, and what happens? Like the tool says, oh, well, you need to have the compatibility spec. I can't let you use this, or proceed with caution. Like the final outcome of like not having it, I guess you know that you don't have it, but is the user going to be like, okay, I'm going to go like look into old registries and find that compatibility spec and do the right thing? Like, I don't think so. I don't think the outcome is ultimately going to change, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just going to add, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think the outcome is going to change.
This is a matter of policy and default, right? So the default could be don't run it. So you will.
But what if the
notice-
person like just doesn't care and they're like, look, I don't care that it's out, like I
Yeah.
want you to run this image and I don't care that the annotation is there. Anyway, Marcin, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that we shouldn't change the default behavior. If you don't have compatibility artifact after the copy, you just run the image and so on. And I would just go with simple solution for now. If it's possible to detect reference over reference API, go for that. If registry doesn't support, well, we have a warning in the documentation about that, and you have to think about that yourself. And maybe in the future we'll improve the situation. I talked already to Red Hat and Quay, and they have in the backlog to support the API in the future. So maybe others will follow that, right? So I'm just a little bit against introducing some additional mechanism for like this kind of detection, but that's just my opinion.
So if we don't want to have it in the manifest, would we give the container content or the entry point and a way to discover whether compatibility has been checked?
Not sure if I understand correctly, but for instance, if you have a container with compatibility check, then that is discovered by a reference API, that you check this. If you don't have such a reference, then you don't. Simple as that, I think.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really thought about the case of something to do with compatibility being inside of the container. I've been thinking about like, oh, there could be plugins outside that use the container to do the check, but to put something like in the entry point of the container, that feels like crossing a boundary that shouldn't be crossed.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's gonna be funny to discuss because there was this idea of attestation. It's gonna be fun to discuss with runtime folks how to run third-party plugins that everybody can create.
With privilege mode and root and as unsafe as possible. That's the way.
So let's keep this use case of this annotation or any mechanism that can be included, and during design phase that we propose something, we can discuss this again. I think that would be the best, that we don't stuck on this point right now.
Okay, so I think we stopped here, if I remember correctly, last time.
The third point, right?
Yeah, so I think this is the first one that we haven't discussed. For me, it's understandable. Any concerns?
From the last time, I remember you had discussion whether is that a separate tool that inspects what's running on the host or not, if it should be part of the compatibility tool or compatibility use case, if it's not something external.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I mean, that's a cool idea. I like it, but what does it have to do with compatibility?
And I think Christian agree with that because that was coming from him, and he said he agrees that it has nothing to do. I mean, that could be covered by some external tools, but
So I
I
think
will
what
be
he's saying here then is I want to be able to parse maybe some compatibility spec on my own that talks about that gives me metadata about the images so that I can keep it in some little database and keep a record of what users are running. So maybe every time for us, or generally speaking, every time someone uses an image, you just have to kind of keep a record that it was used. And that is definitely out of scope of what we're talking about and what we're doing. But then that tool, whatever tool it happens to be that you write, is going to basically retrieve metadata about the compatibility. And I think that would be solved as long as we have an API that can be used to get the compatibility artifact and read it and see what's inside, right?
right. So I would just remove that.
Can we have like I mean, we don't have to, I guess what's the scope of these things that we want? Are these because it's not like a direct use case, but it's like a cool idea of stuff you can do with the compatibility spec.
So I think we can order it at the end. So and then we say sort of implicit order wins, right? So it's a lower priority thing.
Yeah, maybe we can have like a special label to indicate like cool use case, but not like, I don't know. I don't know what to call it.
Nice to have, right? Something like that.
Later, Gator.
Would this actually need an API of some sorts, or can you actually patch this requirement together with like existing things that you know what the images are and you can dig out their specs and so on and so forth? Do we necessarily need a new API for this?
I don't think we need a new API. I think you go like manifests, refers, and then compatibility artifact, and then get the artifact. And you could, I think there's multiple ways you could get the artifact just with your tool.
So, but you referred, Patrick, to the point number 3, asking if we
Yeah,
have some
yeah.
API to investigate those kind of what kind of containers are running there with their manifests. This is what you are asking, or?
Yeah, I was just wondering that whether we are actually thinking of specifying like an API for this, but I mean, as I sort of was thinking that yes, this is possible to dig out the running containers and then figure out their specs, and then you actually have the stats that you were looking for.
Over inspect, right? You will dump
Yeah.
manifest.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about number 4 right now. And Vanessa already was talking about that, so we will catch up with her. And yeah, it looks like
something I
we
would have written.
Yeah, so I think this is in direct conflict with the referrer API discussion that we had before.
Yeah, how is that be possible? Number 4.
Like I say, not every solution has to implement every property, but this is a property some people are going to want.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm a runtime maintainer and I want to pull an image and it has some information about compatibility, but that point is saying that I don't want to do additional API calls. I want everything in that one call. Is that what the point is saying?
Today, runtime maintainers or runtimes themselves, when they pull an image, they pull the index. And then from there, they immediately know which image manifest they want. They pull that image manifest and they run it. They don't want additional API calls, especially to something that is potentially variable, because that means they have to keep querying that remote registry every time they try to run the image.
So that point would require us to put information in one of those places that they're already pulling and not use like a new artifact.
For runtime image selection, yes. If we're talking about something different than runtime image selection, then maybe you can go other places.
Yeah, that's gonna be a problem.
I'm raising it now because if we go another direction and we try to merge a change into the specs, I'll tell you that it will be a problem if you put a referrer's API requirement to all runtimes, because they'll just reject it.
They could just totally ignore the compatibility stuff and you don't have to use it.
That is what would happen. And so that's why I'm raising this issue now.
I wonder about some additional services that can, because I was checking containerd code last time, and there was this idea of plugins. I'm not sure if I understood this correctly, the idea itself, but you can modify how containers are being launched a little bit, right? And I wonder if we could create some sort of plugin for compatibility that you can run ahead of. But it's on the runtime image selection phase, so it's kind of problematic.
Yeah, the runtime image selection is very different from node provisioning and some of the other use cases we've been talking about.
Right. For sure, runtime maintainers wouldn't like to also run some unknown third-party plugins in their own sandbox or something like that. It's gonna be a real issue.
So one question, so it's okay. So if the index manifest would reference another artifact with a caching policy or to be determined, would that be sufficient? So is additional API calls, is that about additional object requests, or is it about request calling another API other than the get API?
How many
cloud
additional API calls are we talking about? Because
Well, in the best case, one, right?
Will it just be one? Because for you to query an external artifact for every single descriptor in that manifest, however many there are in there, could be 50. You have to query for the refers API for that manifest. And then you have to find an entry from the refers API, which may be multiple entries in there, could be multiple compatibility artifacts. Each of those is a manifest, and each of those manifests contains a blob.
Right,
So
but
this exponentially grows.
I understand. But if that manifest, if I remember correctly, this offhand has a platform entry with some operator system and architecture, and then the initial config or index referrer, right? And if there would be another entry alongside, which would be then an additional content accessible object to be fetched, then it would be just one object to fetch, right? It's
that's if
that
you're already down at the image level, right?
Yes.
Not from the index, because the config is not in the index. The config is in the image. So at that point, you have already selected which one you're going to run.
Okay, so maybe I'm missing something, but it says index here, right?
Yeah, the index is the multi-platform manifest, and so you might have multiple images to pick from.
Correct. But there is already a selection logic.
There is today. And so we're potentially adding different ones to say, hey, I want to select the image that has MPI version 1 versus MPI version 2.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have two images there, are you saying I need to now pull those two images, get their config blobs for each of those two images, and then query another blob from that? That's even worse.
No, I think so. I was saying that you would only pull the compatibility spec, which would then further detail the decision on which image to pick.
But compatibility spec is not enough. You also have to pull some binaries that will validate the spec itself, and who knows how many it's gonna be. This is the first problem. But the second problem is execution of those binaries itself.
Yeah, the big
So
problem
I don't
to me,
think a runtime should actually pull arbitrary binaries to be executed to validate a compatibility spec.
yeah, that is entirely up to how we implement this. But to me, the big challenge is I today, with very simple container images, have 20 different platforms. Not 20, 10. 10 different platforms in there. And so as a runtime, if I'm going through each of those descriptors, I don't want to query a refers API for each one of those, especially if we're going to double, triple that number, because
Fully
there might not
agreed.
be just one for Linux AMD 64. There might be 5 images for Linux AMD 64 for different compatibility scenarios.
So should we just like throw away the artifact in this case, should we throw away the artifact ID and just like shove it alongside platform or something? Like what would even be our options if we want all of the data that we need to be in that image index?
That kind of goes back to the proposal I made a while back and threw it in the meeting minutes, but I'll at some point kind of solidify that into a proposal, which is annotations and runtimes that know to look for specific annotations that they want.
You're suggesting annotations at the level of the image index or something, or annotations within, like alongside platform?
The descriptor in the index. And so each entry in that index is a descriptor, and each one of those has annotations. And so you could add an annotation there that says, this one, which is the 5th time you've seen me call out Linux AMD 64, has these annotations set to it, and your runtime says, oh, that's what I'm looking for. Then it'll just pick that one out.
Okay, so just so I understand, all of the kind of metadata that we've been talking about that a tool could use for compatibility would basically be kind of shoved in there. and it could potentially be like really big and bloated. Okay, Marcin, you can take.
Yeah, and it's a problem, right? Because if you have very specific use cases like with this API, you have to have some kind of software that will validate this API that's running on the host to have with the image selection, right?
I think we're going very different ways, depending on which problems we're solving. And so I'm solving a different problem than one some of you are, which is I'm trying to pick which image I want to run, and other people are trying to get all the metadata about this image put into one artifact that has all the details in there. If you're just trying to pick an image, as the image creator, I'm going to know exactly the 5 different images I'm creating and the 2 different annotations I need to set with a different version for each one. And so it's not going to be this gigantic list of everything. It's not going to be some convoluted, I need to sort out all these different compatibility things. And as the runtime implementer, the person that specifies the runtime out there, I'm going to know that, hey, if I want this thing to run the MPI version 1 stuff out there, I'm going to put that selector on my runtime that knows to look for that anytime it sees it. And so I, as the provisioner of that node, is going to say, hey, I provision this node with this version of MPI. I'm going to tell it to look for that in all those images.
Right, but runtime will still have to know what kind of version of MPI you are running on the host.
The runtime doesn't, you as the provisioner of the runtime do. So you as a sysadmin are going to provision that node. You're going to install MPI version X. You're going to set the runtime up with that flag that says look for MPI version X.
Ah, okay. You will do it that way. Just you will set over the runtime some kind of flag to look at in the index, right? Okay,
And so
that would work.
The runtime is just looking for an annotation that you as the node provisioner has told it to look for. And so all the complex, needing to sort out all the stuff, that's all pushed onto the sysadmin that's provisioning the node that needs to know, okay, I'm provisioning this node with MPI. Let me go out there. MPI says, here's our annotation that we're going to use for all of our stuff. Go ahead and put that criteria in my runtime to know to look for it.
Yeah, we don't need plugins. We have sysadmins. Just like make them do all that.
It really defers a problem instead of us trying to solve it all. And so from the spec level, we're pushing that problem off to someone else, which as spec authors, we're very good at doing.
So how do we move forward? So I think I understand the intention. So the intention is to minimize complexity and performance impact of parsing the compatibility spec or adding this feature, right? That's the intention, correct? Can we soften the statement in that way?
I would move forward the same way you move forward on the other ones that are contentious, and to say that there are users that want this criteria. There are other users that don't want this criteria. So just keep this, track it, and depending on the implementations, we'll look at them later on, decide which ones they fit. And is this good or bad for the different scenarios?
Yeah, this one seems bigger though, because this one is leading to 2 fundamentally very different designs. It's not just like have an annotation or not have an annotation.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a pretty fundamental decision, and I mean I understand it, right? So I think the runtimes, different runtimes, measure themselves or compete against with performance, right? So there's a trade-off to be made between features and performance. We don't want people to choose, right? So we want people to have the ability to implement compatibility and have performance, decent performance.
I've said early on, I think we're talking about 2 different products entirely. So we're putting both of this under compatibility spec, but I think there is a tool that would be good for node selection and provisioning and that sort of stuff. And there's probably going to be a different tool that's going to be useful for runtime operators. And so we might come out of this whole project and say, we couldn't come up with a solution. We came up with 2 different solutions for 2 different problems.
Maybe we should get rid of registries altogether and have the sysadmins and have them in like one data center and have the sysadmins have to run there with a portable hard drive and then put them on the portable hard drive and then come back. And then we don't have to think about manifests or pulling. We just offload to the sysadmins. This is the new future. They're all going to be like super fit and then everything's going to be really slow.
Yeah,
you have to get the training in somehow.
Exactly,
I-
it's like a feature.
I agree with Brandon on that one. I mean, I think there is, for runtime point of view, there is no other way. I mean, I had really was thinking how to do it the best way that you can execute some plugins and put everything into one solution, but it's not possible. It will, if we execute some additional plugins or putting some additional stuff on the runtime side just for image selection, it's not gonna pass for sure. So there's this annotation idea where you configure runtime to look for some specific stuff. I think it's nice.
I was about to say, I'm going to be the one with the OS that can't execute Linux binaries. So
No
It's all
worries.
WebAssembly these days.
oh yeah, and we're the one without the WebAssembly runtime still. So
Okay. This joke didn't fly, sorry for that.
Cool.
Yeah,
So
I think it's actually okay and good that we've identified two pretty different designs that both kind of have feet in different ways. And I think I'll agree with Brandon that we don't have to really decide now, but we can just acknowledge that we have these two designs and we'll move forward and finish going through the use cases. And then when we actually think about the implementations, then that's when we'll do our face-offs and
Yeah, so I would leave it as it is and move forward to the next use case.
Yep.
so human readable, I would say that maybe that comes down to a tool again, a tool that could parse some kind of compatibility spec or wherever it happens to be, if it's not an artifact, and then present it in a nice to consume way as opposed to JSON dump. But I guess it depends who you are, because if you're a developer and you just get like some JSON dump and you use JQ, that's pretty good. I guess adding additional context, I don't know if that's within scope of what like the spec should be doing.
I put that point, and my idea was just to keep, yes, human readable YAML or JSON. But it can get tricky if you represent a graph by JSON, because then if you look out all this about the specification and chain how everything looks like, you have to spend some time. So maybe we could just use some tool for processing some kind of reports or whatever that is easy for end users. But as Vanessa said, it will be on the tool level. So yeah.
Oh yeah, so you mean like having like a web interface that is generated from or something like that. That's like really easy to read.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be even a web interface. It can be like, I don't know, some output for terminal output that shows you nicely, like have an arrow here, go to the right, down, up, or something like that.
You mentioned readable, but you actually did not mention writable. And that was probably the reason.
Yes, the writable, you know, if you have multiple prefixes or plugins that solve some issues and you want to connect them, if you do it in your editor, like specifying the JSON yourself, it sucks. So, and I'm not the UX person. I have no idea how to create good, usable tools. So it will be a challenge, at least for me, how to design some user-friendly tool that helps you to create this kind of compatibility stuff. But I saw Vanessa had some nice ideas already in her proposal with some kind of options how to connect stuff. So maybe that would be the way.
Yeah, so for this point, would this be a later one or akin to the first one?
Yeah, I think we can move, right?
So do we want to label this as later? Sorry, I didn't hear it.
I would just keep it as it is, to be honest, and keep in mind that, I mean, personally, I wouldn't put this point into my proposal because this is kind of tool, but it's nice to have it there that to think later that if you design a new tool or something like that, you have to think of that. But from my perspective, let's just okay, it can be later. Let's just keep it there.
Yeah, I would add later. It's like slightly, it's like next. Yeah. So this would conceptually be like taking all of the images that you currently have and getting their compatibility information and then checking it for the new operating system. So that assumes that, I guess to step back, what if the image that the image that you have may not be supported by the new operating system, in which case you'd have to filter it down. But is the assumption here that some of the compatibility specs will actually be able to tell you like, yes, this would be supported on the new operating system version? I guess my follow-up question is like, if you find one of your images is not supported, then you'd have to go back anyway and do another query. And it kind of, I guess the simplest thing here, I guess in my mind, would be to just save like the top level URIs of the images that you want, and then do the query again and get them fresh. Make sure you have the correct compatibility things. Anyway, someone else. There's like 3 people with their hands up, and I'm not going to choose, so someone else.
For me, this feels like we are solving the wrong problem, or solving a problem the wrong way, which is that it sounds like we're trying to do an in-place operating system upgrade and make sure that we didn't break any of the images that are already running. And I would step back and say, yeah, an in-place operating system upgrade might not be what you want to do when you're running containers. It's the whole idea of cattle versus pets is that these things are all disposable, ephemeral. You provision a new node and see what works. So that's my take. Till, I think you're next.
It was about the same. We do have OS upgrades and stuff in our system because we are pre-cattle containers. So yes, we actually have that situation. But there is the only kind of thing that you would need for that situation is keep the information around. So that whatever tool does whatever reason, it can reason itself. Like we just simply keep the information around on a spec level, and from the rest is a tool level question. If you really want to go the in-place upgrade route. Other than that, for the Kubernetes case, you need a stable image registry anyway, because it's just going to be a new node, and the new node is going to pull. In other cases where there would be the upgrade case, well, as I said, just keep the stuff around somewhere, stuff it on the file system, and whenever somebody actually wants to look at it, they can, and especially not need to pull it, because we had the issue in production that images have the tendency to change on the registry, even with stable tags. And so artifacts would be removed sometimes on like point releases and things like that. So whatever we have locally, we need to be able to, if we want to do a verification on what we have locally, we need to store it locally. But again, could be a different to, hey tool, if you really need that kind of thing around, keep your information locally. This is not spec, but may be done.
So basically, this is a similar point to the one before where we said that additional API calls to the registry should not be required, right? So it's related to that one.
Yeah, but probably for a different reason. For me, it's more like be sure that what you run locally is also what you downloaded at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, similar situation.
So I will go next if you don't mind. I mean, for me personally, this point goes to of the usage of the tool, the usage of the tool itself. I mean, if you have a node A with containers that are running there, and you want to upgrade the node for whatever reason, you don't do the upgrade first and check compatibility or something like that. You just need to bring node B, check, for example, with this operating system version if compatibility passes, and if it passes, then okay, I can do upgrade on node A, and I keep the information in the sysadmin head, and that's all. I mean, I wouldn't go very complicated in here. I think it downs to the usage of the tool that you can execute the compatibility spec on the other node with different operating system version just to know if you can do the upgrade of the node A, and that's all.
Patrick, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was actually thinking that is this actually any different case? I mean, as Marcin just said, that you upgrade a node, check compatibility, and notice it's okay, and then you run with it. I was just thinking, is there any need for an on-the-fly update of a running node with like new information? And that's the only case where you need to do an upgrade in between, that you were actually running something and now you can run suddenly something else as well. Let's hope that we cannot downgrade anything, so everything that you just supported you still have to be able to support with your OS upgrade. I think that's to me it sounded like that's the only new thing in this requirement. Otherwise it should be just the normal thing. Yeah, you have this kind of host, and now you figure out what it is capable of doing, and it's business as usual.
So I would keep the point as it is, and I think it's coming from Joe. I can ask him later what he exactly meant by that, if he has something specific in his mind. But I would just keep it as it is and move to the next point. Maybe we need a little bit some more details about his idea, and that's all. This point is exactly the same as the previous one to me. It's just on a different level. Instead of upgrading OS, you are dealing with hardware.
No, I mean, these both use cases describe to me that you cannot have runtime components that check for specific hardware or specific operating system features.
Cannot or can?
Cannot.
Cannot.
Because both are talking about future, right? So both are expecting you can validate before you have the new operating system, you can validate before you have the new hardware. So we cannot have any runtime or like code execution that checks for a specific compatibility.
Yeah, but that would be totally up to the sysadmin, right? I mean, you first check compatibility and later you run stuff on the host, unless you want to just run and see it fails or something like that. So
yeah, you cannot run something in order to determine the compatibility.
So I would leave this decision totally up to the sysadmin. I mean, I wouldn't put in if I understand you correctly, I wouldn't put any constraint into any specification that doesn't allow me to run any containers before I check compatibility. That has to be a human decision, not some additional checks done by software or something like that. If I got your idea correctly.
So I'm not having an idea. I'm just trying to make sense out of the requirement.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
understand the implication of the requirement. So for me, this means there can't be like a part in the spec that says check/proc CPU info for a specific flag, right? that wouldn't be possible when we accept this use case. Okay, thanks for the comment. Okay, so can we finish the last 2 points in 2 minutes? We can try, right?
Yeah, so this one's easy. This is basically just like the same thing as trying to match a particular image to a particular machine. It's just in a workflow or a workload. Those are different. I won't get into it, but I think this is actually covered. It's valid, but I think it's covered enough that we could probably just delete the point. Or we can just leave it and move on to the next one. But it's just like a scaled version of the same thing.
Yeah, I think we can leave it.
What kind of hook? Sorry, go ahead.
I think this one's going the direction that if you're writing a runtime like run C, you should need to know about MPI and kernel patch versions and libc and all these other things. You should just, whatever your selection criteria should be something you don't have to go out and query 15 different things.
So so like, what is a hook? Is a hook like a plugin, and would that be added to the runtime? Like, how does that work?
If this is something that the user injects into the runtime, then the user will just be saying, check this key for this value. And the runtime doesn't need to know anything about MPI at all. It just knows this annotation is set to this value.
So do runtimes already have support for hooks?
I don't think they have the stuff that I'm proposing yet. But I think that something that is generic where they don't have to go out and query hardware that might be changing as time goes on, new GPU cards are added and things like that. I think something where you're injecting the dependency versus they have to go out and determine the dependency. I think that's the difference.
So this point is suggesting that we have runtimes have the ability to have hooks. So that would be a new thing for runtimes to support.
Yeah, I don't know if I wrote this one or not. Looks kind of like me, but maybe not. Because I was always thinking annotations rather than hooks, but hooks as well. Just something in there where the runtime itself doesn't need to know this, but it's got some way this external dependency is getting injected.
Does this need to be in the specification, by the way, this figuring out that how we detect something, or is that somebody else's problem?
I would say that what we create should be easy for a runtime to implement. We don't have
and
to
I think
tell
generally
runtimes
the
how to
OCI
implement it.
working groups can touch into other different specs. It doesn't have to be like we're only working on this one spec. We can go to the runtime spec and make a suggestion for change, I think.
In Illumos land, we had the same issue back then when Solaris was changing from Spark to x86. And it ended up with basically a way to annotate the image itself or the host itself. And we basically just had a very capable matching function where you could select which matching function you wanted, and whatever wasn't set on the host, you could then kind of like make a match and figure out what it was. And that also had the benefit, if it was ever set wrongly, you could just fix it as a sysadmin.
So did it break into song like matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match? Since we've brought up a few musical references today. I would like that to be a requirement. I would like my tool to sing to me. That's my request.
It also allowed later on weird things like we could just cross package a ARM image on x86 by just setting the right annotations on it.
Anyway,
Okay.
we are out
2
of
minutes
time.
over. Yeah.
Yes.
Another productive week. Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome
you.
back, everyone. Happy 2024. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Yeah, okay, I'm over it. We'll see everyone. See everyone
See
next
ya.
week.
Thanks,
See
Dirk,
everyone
for
next
sharing the screen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.